So I'd like to welcome Ash Riddington, who works at Brighton, Sussex University Hospital Trust. Thank you so much, Ash, for giving us your time today after what happened with the South Network today when it couldn't happen. But actually, it's meant we've had a lot more interest, and it means we're going out around the country, which is fantastic. Just a bit of housekeeping. If you can all put yourselves on mute, please, so that it just means we don't get any interference while Ash is presenting. I'll keep an eye on the chat box for any questions. We can do those at the end if you're happy with that, Ash. At the end, we'll do questions, and then depending on numbers, we can hopefully people can actually ask their question, and I'll do my best to manage that. I'm learning new skills every day. So Ash, as I said, is midwife at Brighton and Sussex University Hospital Trust. Has been a midwife for 6 years. 3 of those have been at Brighton and Sussex. Ash works with Helen Green, who those are the gender inclusion midwives and the only ones in the UK, which so hopefully that will grow across the UK and there'll be more. But that's for the past 2 years, but as well as doing his clinical work within as a community midwife within. And actually, you're within Brighton, are you, or you're not Mid Sussex, are you, Brighton? Ash and Helen won a silver award from the Chief Midwife Officer Jackie Dunkley-Bent in November 2019, which was fantastic to see that achievement, so well done. And that was for an outstanding contribution to midwifery. At the beginning of this year, presented at the first International Trans Pregnancy Conference in Leeds. Lucky enough you got that in just before the pandemic, which must have been good. And also sits on the steering panel for NHS England, research into the experience of trans and non-binary birthing people in the UK. And actually, we've seen quite a lot of that being posted across the MVP network this week, actually from Lisa. So it's great to see that, Ash, and we're look forward to seeing everything that the work that you do as you go along in your role, if you can fit it in. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to put myself on mute now, and I'll keep an eye on the chat box. And over to you, Ash.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. So this is my first time presenting and sharing my slides proper. So bear with me while I get it popped up. I was just thinking, whilst I'm getting this set up, maybe anyone who hasn't introduced themselves yet, just type in the chat box what your role is, so that I'm making sure that I'm tailoring everything to the right sort of people who are watching today, because it looks like we've got a real variety. Lots of MVP chairs, 1 consultant midwife. Who else have we got? Kathy Brewster's typing. Hello, Kathy. Who else have we got? Co-chairs. I think the furthest one I've seen is, my geography is terrible, but maybe Cheshire. So we've got really good, oh, Manchester, even further north. Wonderful. Thanks, Kathy. Brilliant. Okay. Can everybody see my first slide? Is that working?
Yes, thank you, Ash. I can see it. I think.
All right. I'm going to close down the meeting chat. So Suzanne has already done a wonderful introduction for me. So you already know that my name's Ash. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I work as a community midwife in BSUH, Brighton and Sussex University Hospitals NHS Trust. And I'm here today to talk to you about gender inclusion. So making perinatal services more inclusive for everybody of any gender. And what I thought would be a good place to start is just defining some basic terms, because not everybody is used to talking about gender, and there's some new words that you might have heard of. So let's just go right back to basics and make sure that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of terminology. So my lovely little stick man, can everybody see my stick person? Yeah, that's working, wonderful. So what we're going to be talking about today is, the second bullet point down is gender identity. So that means what somebody's internal sense of their gender is. Do they feel like a woman? Do they feel like a man? Do they feel like a kind of a combination of the two, or something else separate, or neither? It's a very, very subjective sense. nobody else can define it for you. It's just an innate sense which you learn to tune into over the course of your life. One little reflective exercise I would encourage you to do is think about how you know what your gender identity is. Most people in this meeting are probably going to be people who identify as women. So have a little think about, how do I know that I do identify as a woman rather than a man? What is it that gives me that innate sense? And that gender identity that we're going to be focusing on the inside, many people will try to express on the outside through their gender expression. So it's how you communicate your gender identity to the outside world. And that includes culturally dictated things like haircuts, the sort of clothes that you wear, sort of language that you use, and your body language, how you greet people. If you shake their hand or give them a kiss on the cheek is one really obvious cue that I can think of. So gender expression is used to try to communicate gender identity, but some of that is not always in our control. So for trans people, they've been socialized, raised in one gender. Sometimes some of their gender expression cues may still carry over from that previous one. You can't necessarily tell somebody's gender identity from their gender expression, particularly as it is culturally specific how you express your gender. Now, both those things are distinct from sexuality. Often gender identity and sexuality get a little bit confused in people's minds, but they're two distinctly separate things. So you can identify as a woman and be attracted to other women, so be a gay woman, or you can identify as a woman and be attracted to men, be a straight woman. Both those people are still women, but they've got different sexual attractions or orientations. I think the two get a little bit confused because we often talk about LGBT as a whole umbrella term, which makes sense because some of the challenges which LGBT people face are also faced by trans people, but not necessarily. So even though we talk about LGBT people as a group, they're not necessarily all homogenous. And it's important to remember that sexuality and gender identity are two distinct concepts. And finally, we come down to sex at the bottom. So what that refers to is physical sex, which we are taught in school is very binary. You're either male or female, and those are dictated by your chromosomes being XY for men, XX for women, and that cascades on to produce different hormonal profiles and different body development. Science is now starting to learn that sex isn't quite as simple as that. It's not quite so binary as we previously thought, and intersex conditions are a lot more common. But for the purposes of today's presentation, we'll just kind of keep it simple that sex is how you are assigned at birth based on what genitalia you are born with. So a baby born with a penis is assigned male at birth, and a baby born with a vagina is assigned female at birth. So all those different four things which we've defined, gender expression, gender identity, sexuality or orientation and attraction, and sex, are all independent factors that can come together in different ways for different people. And we're going to explore those different ways. So first off, the first term I'd like to define for you is cisgender. And some of you might have heard this term before. Some of you, if you've done a bit of Latin at school, or if you've ever studied chemistry, you might know the word cis, meaning same or aligning or matching. So cisgender means that someone's gender identity matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. So for our purposes, for providing perinatal services, we're going to meet lots and lots and lots of cis women. So people who were born with a vulva and vagina, were assigned female at birth, and also identify as female. And I'm not in any way pretending that they're not the majority. They absolutely are the majority that we're caring for. And it's important that the language that we use, and I'll come on to language in a little bit, reflects that most people we care for are women. So if you only take one thing away from today, it's that trans inclusion and gender inclusion doesn't have to be anti-woman, doesn't have to be anti-feminist. In actual fact, it is a feminist act to be inclusive of everybody. And it's possible to both protect cis women's rights and trans people's rights in birthing all at the same time. And I think the two actually complement each other. So cis women are going to be most of our client base, and we have to make sure that we cater for them and protect their rights as well, because we still live in a patriarchal society where women's rights are very important. For the people who access our services who aren't cis women, there may be a few different terms that they use to describe themselves. One of them might be transgender, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of, or trans for short. Again, going back to that Latin or chemistry root, trans means opposite or different or not in alignment. So transgender means that somebody's gender identity differs from the sex that they were assigned at birth. So that might mean somebody is a trans man. They were assigned female at birth due to being born with a vulva and vagina. However, at some point in their life, be that childhood, adolescence, or sometimes well into adulthood, he's realized that actually his identity is masculine, male, and he will now refer to himself as a trans man. On the other side from trans men, we have trans women who just flip everything around. They were assigned male at birth, born with a penis, but at some point have realized that they identify as women and therefore are referred to as such as trans women. And most of the time, people's pronouns will match up with their gender identity. So a trans man will want to be called he, him, his, and other masculine terms. A trans woman will want to be called she, her, hers, and other feminine terms. Some trans people may choose to transition medically. So that might include taking hormones to help to align not only their sort of the way their brain functions and their way of thinking, but also their physical body makeup to match better how their gender identity is. So for people who are coming to perinatal services, we're not going to have any trans women service users. Don't have a uterus, they're not going to be able to get pregnant and give birth. We will only have trans men service users in terms of the actual birthing parents. Partners is another matter. But for the birthing parents, we will be meeting trans men. And they might have taken testosterone in the past to help to masculinize their body, to help them to increase their muscle mass, to grow facial hair, to deepen their voice, and to just feel more comfortable in themselves psychologically as well. And they might also have had some form of surgical transition as well. They might have chosen to have what we call top surgery, which you can see on the screen here. Sebastian has had his breast tissue removed and sculpted to have a more masculine chest contour. One little point I'd like to make about medical transition is that it's not an essential for people to be considered trans and to have the right to be respected in their gender identity. Some people don't want to medically transition. They feel quite comfortable with how their body is at the moment, and they will just socially transition. They'll change their name, ask for their pronouns to be respected, maybe change the way that they dress. And for them, that's what makes them feel comfortable in their life. For other people, medical transition is absolutely life-saving and 100% essential. So everybody's different, but we shouldn't, what we call in the community, gatekeep. We shouldn't only respect people as trans or respect their gender identity and pronouns if they've had X number of months on surgery, X number of months on hormones, and sort of gone through the checklist. If someone says they're trans, and we treat them as they deserve to be treated. Has anybody heard any other terms under the whole umbrella of transgender? I'm hoping you might have heard of the term non-binary as well. Yeah, seeing some nods. Excellent, wonderful. So non-binary does come under the trans umbrella. People who are non-binary, their gender identity doesn't align with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So technically they are transgender, but not every non-binary person will self-define as trans. They may see non-binary and transgender as two distinct entities, or they may see non-binary as coming under the umbrella of trans. It's open to interpretation by that individual. People who are non-binary have a really challenging time in our society communicating their gender identity to the world. It's in a world which is put into two boxes of male and female. It can be very difficult to demonstrate that you don't fit into either of those two boxes. So often non-binary people become invisible, they are not recognized or acknowledged. And I would put a good amount of money on lots of non-binary people accessing perinatal services without us having any idea that they have. Because unless we ask, how do you identify your gender? And unless we ask, what pronouns would you like me to use for you? We're not necessarily going to know. You can see my example here of Jack, who is a non-binary birth parent. You wouldn't necessarily know from looking at Jack without asking them that actually they use they them pronouns instead of she her pronouns. It's important that we have these conversations so that people don't go invisible and their needs don't go unmet. Some non-binary people will also go down a medical transition route, as binary trans people may do. So who knows, Jack might want to take testosterone. Jack might want to have top surgery or not. It's totally up to them, completely their choice. Yeah. Do people have any practice using singular they them pronouns? Have you ever had to use them in conversation with somebody that you know? Yeah, Nick has, excellent. Hannah, not yet. If it's something that is new to you, I recommend doing a bit of practice with it. So together with a friend and have a pretend conversation talking about somebody who's non-binary and using they them pronouns. Sometimes people say it takes them a bit of time to get used to, they sort of trip their tongue up on it initially, but with practice it becomes a lot easier and it feels just as natural as using she her pronouns. Other people sometimes say that it's not grammatically correct and that's why they find it difficult to use a singular they, but actually we use a singular they all the time when we're referring to somebody that we don't know their gender. So I could say something like, oh, I was on the bus today and there was a bag on the seat. I wonder who that belongs to. They left their bag behind. Let's hope they come and get it. I don't want them to go without their bag and their house keys. I used they and them multiple times in that sentence. It didn't sound at all weird because we're used to using it in that context of somebody with an unknown gender. So it's just applying skills that you already have to a slightly different situation and putting in the practice and getting comfortable and fluent with that. And if you do make a mistake, which is probably going to happen by using the wrong pronoun, just simply apologize and move on. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Actually making a big deal out of it makes it a whole lot worse for the person concerned. It draws a lot more attention to the mistake. So just say, sorry, they, them, or oops, sorry, they, and then move on with the conversation. Yeah, I can guarantee that your embarrassment is, is going to be there, but try not to make the focus on that. There's a little chat box just come up. I'm going to see what somebody's got to say. Wonderful. I've used non-binary pronoun a lot in the past, referring to partner when not necessarily wanting to out myself in conversation. Absolutely, really, really good point. And I think that also demonstrates one example where we've learned to update our language in perinatal contexts. Because previously we'd always talk about, oh, the woman and her husband, wouldn't we? And if you meet midwives who've been for 30, 40 years, they might still talk about the husband. Which wasn't very inclusive. It didn't reflect on people who are single parents or people who have partners who they're not married to or partners who are women. So that was one cultural language change that we've already gone through, and I think we've done a really good job about getting used to talking about partners instead of husbands. So that's a really good point. Thank you for raising that. And Ellen has also said that my daughter's friend is non-binary as well. It's great that so many more young people feel able to come out these days. It is absolutely fantastic. If you look at the media, depending on what media you read, you might get the impression that it's that a lot more people are identifying as trans or non-binary these days. But I think it's actually that our culture is gradually becoming a little bit safer. So people are just able to say. So trans and non-binary people have been around for all of history. But in a safe society, you're going to see more of them because they're going to feel able to tell you, feel able to come out. And I'm really glad that your daughter's friend felt able to. That's great. Quick little note on pronouns and non-binary people. I've put on there that they might prefer they, them pronouns, but they might not as well. It is quite a lot of hassle to ask people to use they, them pronouns. For some people, they might make the call that actually, you know what, it's too much stress to ask for they, them pronouns and not have them respected and used. It's actually going to be less hurtful for me to just carry on using the pronouns of my birth sex and just kind of deal with the dysphoria that comes with that, rather than continuously coming out and asking again and again and again for they, them pronouns and probably having quite a few mistakes made. So that is a perfectly valid choice. And also some people just might not feel dysphoria or discomfort around their birth sex pronouns. So you might meet a non-binary person who is still comfortable having he or she referred to for them. It's completely valid and we should respect that. So we've done a little bit defining of key terms. I'd like to just talk a little bit now about why all of this work that Helen and I are doing even started in the first place. And I'm going to have a little sip of water as well. So this work, I think the groundwork was laid by Helen about 5-6 years ago now, when Helen was a student at Brighton University, starting to talk about it with their lecturers and raising it with midwives. But the ball really got rolling and we started to pick up pace 3-4 years when we were hearing through the local community that there was a significant number of trans men who were free birthing. For those of you who aren't aware, I'm sure you are, but free birthing means giving birth without any sort of professional trained attendant, and doing that deliberately, not just sort of having a quick labour and a whoopsie home birth, but deliberately planning to do that. It's a perfectly valid choice and people absolutely have the legal right to do it, and I would stand up for their right to free birth. However, these people were making that choice out of fear, not out of empowerment. So they weren't saying, free birth, that sounds awesome, excellent, I feel really confident in my body, I want this experience to be owned and just done by myself and my partner at home. They were actually feeling, okay, I've got to give birth, I don't feel safe to access NHS services, and so I'm not going to. I'm going to just DIY myself at home. And for us, that just really isn't acceptable. That's not okay for the NHS to be completely inaccessible for a whole swathe of the population, that they are forced into free birthing, which carries risks for both the birthing parent and for the child as well. So that was really our trigger point, that we really need to start paying attention and making some changes around here. People don't think that that's their only option. It's also a statutory duty of us as midwives to make sure our services are inclusive and accessible to all. No matter how we feel about trans and non-binary people and their rights, the fact is that they're there, they get pregnant, and we need to make sure that we can provide safe and supportive care to them. So what sort of challenges might be leading up to that choice to free birth, or or that choice to not access medical care? What sort of challenges might people face on account of their gender identity? And these are worth bearing in mind. So transphobia is a really common experience, which is the experience of harassment or discrimination due to the fact that you are trans or even perceived as trans. A few friends of mine who are cisgender people, so they're not trans, have had some horrible transphobic abuse because apparently they look trans, whatever that means. But it just goes to show that transphobia is harmful for everybody, not just trans people. The rates of unemployment are also very high amongst trans people, either through not getting their foot in the door, getting job interviews because their previous reference is in an old name, old gender, doesn't match the current one, or losing their job during transition is really common, sadly. Unstable housing is also very common, with almost 1 in 5 trans people having been homeless at some point in their lives. That's huge, almost 1 in 5. Mental health is quite a common comorbidity alongside feeling gender dysphoria. But interestingly, that really changes for people pre and post transition. So pre-transition, and transition, that might not even be medical transition, just social, just living your life and being yourself. Pre-transition, the rates of suicide ideation amongst trans people is 63%, almost 2/3, which is shockingly high. Post-transition, that drops to 3%. That change, that gets me every time. That's absolutely phenomenal. And it just goes to show how important it is that we take people's transition seriously, that we don't try and push them back into an old box that they used to be in, but we treat them according to who they are now, who they tell us that they are, even if they don't quite look like it yet, even if they're on the beginning of their journey. It's really important that we do validate that experience. And finally, and potentially most relevant to us, is that lots and lots of trans people will have had a really experience with healthcare providers in the past. 65% report a previous negative healthcare experience. And that can come along a whole spectrum of things. It may their first time that they go to their GP to explain that they think they're trans and ask for referral to gender identity services, being dismissed off the bat. I've heard all sorts of horrible responses to that first conversation of going to the GP, of telling people, oh, you just need to settle down and get married and have a kid, that'll sort you out. Or, oh, you're just confused about your sexuality. We now know that gender and sexuality are different things, don't we? We know that's the case. Other people saying, oh, I won't go into it because it's pretty traumatic, but there's a high chance that someone's going to have had a negative experience with their GP, or potentially with presenting to A&E. A&E is a big place where trans people experience transphobia because there's no access to their prior medical records, so it might not say on there, by the way, this person's trans. Their body might look a little bit different to what you previously expected. And also a lot of trans people will delay coming into A&E until the very last minute through fear of transphobia. So they may end up presenting to A&E in an acute emergency scenario rather than feeling safe to go to their GP and handle a medical issue in the early stages, because they're just fearful of that interaction with healthcare professionals. Plenty of people have had care denied to them due to being trans as well. And that's not even just transition related healthcare, having injections of hormones, etc. That also just includes general healthcare of people saying, no, I don't want to care for this person. I might be a doctor, but I don't want to care for them because they're trans and I don't agree with it. Not acceptable, completely against the GMC codes, but it's stuff that happens. It does, even here in the UK in 2020. Even with the most welcoming and positive and enthusiastic healthcare worker, there can still be negative experiences simply due to lack of education. So plenty of the doctors I've talked to have not had any education on gender issues in healthcare, on what medical transition involves, what social transition might mean for a person. So a lot of doctors only know as much as you or I do. Well, probably you do. I've got inside knowledge. So a lot of the doctors don't have any sort of training at all. Anything they do know is usually done off their own back. They've chosen to do some extra professional development in that area. So many trans people will have had to actually educate their doctor on their rights as a trans person, on their potential options, on their what their hormones mean for their health. It's quite common to have medical conditions dismissed as a result of transition for trans people. So you might have a dodgy mole on your back. Oh, that's because of your hormones. It's not skin cancer, that kind of thing. Yeah, I can see Suzanne shaking her head. It's exactly the response I have as well. So all of those things, that background is worth bearing in mind. Oh, we've got a good little input from somebody here. Let's see what someone said. There's a huge gap in research focusing on trans experiences in healthcare. Absolutely, 100%. Very good point, Eleanor, and thank you for that. There isn't a huge amount of research out there. What is there has just been done in the last couple of years. So we're still really learning at the beginning of this about how trans people navigate and experience accessing healthcare services. So those are some of the challenges that trans people might face. What additional challenges might they face if they find themselves accidentally pregnant, or if they have chosen to pursue pregnancy and parenting? Let's just go through them. Invisibility is a big one. If you look around a typical GP waiting room or children's centre waiting room, how many pictures of trans men or non-binary people do you see? 0, absolutely none. It's all cisgender, white women, slim women, attractive women, you know, models usually. I don't think many people feel that they align with the sort of pictures you see in Emma's Diary magazine, that kind of thing, but certainly not someone who identifies as a man. They're definitely not going to feel like they're represented in those posters and leaflets imagery. There's also not that many role models in the media as well. That has changed in the last year or so. There have been some good films come out, which I'm going to point out to you at the end. But there's still very few and far between. Misinformation is another big challenge as well. And this misinformation goes right up to the top of including gender identity clinics where the consultants are prescribing hormones. I've met people who informed that testosterone will make them permanently infertile and they will never be able to conceive a pregnancy. Absolutely not true. Quite dangerous to tell people that, considering that you can become pregnant while taking testosterone by accident, not a contraceptive. And also a real shame as well to be telling people that you don't have any future of creating family biologically with your body, when actually they do. So a lot of people don't know what their reproductive capabilities are because they're getting misinformation from right up on high. There's also misinformation about the risks involved as well, and an over-assuming risk as well, assuming that somebody who has taken testosterone in the past and has managed their body in that way, even if they stop testosterone in pregnancy, assuming that that creates a problem for the baby when it really doesn't. As long as the circulating amounts of testosterone in the body are at similar levels to cisgender women, no problem. Doesn't matter that they've got a beard and they've got more muscles from previous testosterone use. That is completely safe and it's okay. During pregnancy, as we know, the body goes through a lot of changes, and a lot of those changes are perceived as feminine in terms of increase in chest growth, change in the hips, changing in the shape of your bum. That might be a really difficult and uncomfortable experience for someone with a masculine gender identity. And we're quite used to supporting people through those body changes. For example, working with someone who's had an eating disorder in the past might find the idea of weight gain and their breasts and hips developing to be really difficult for them. But as midwives, we have those skills to support people. And what we're just learning to do is transfer those skills from one scenario to just a slightly different application, but the skills are there already. Due to the really gendered nature of perinatal care, all of our language, our IT systems, and the way that we talk to people is heavily gendered. We're so used to saying she and her. We're so used to saying woman. And I think particularly in the UK, we use the term woman a lot because we talk about patients. We want to stop it being medicalized, which is great. Absolutely pro fan of that. But what we've done is we substituted woman. And we're now realizing that that substitution, the word woman, doesn't always fit for everybody. It will do for 99%, but for that 1%, it won't do. So that language which staff are used to using can be really problematic for trans and non-binary people. Seeing that language on websites, on social media, on video clips, in leaflets, is a big thing that puts people off from accessing maternity services, because they just feel that's not for me. They're not talking about me. They're not talking about people like me. I don't see how I can access that service because they don't even know that I exist. So not only is language a problem in general conversation that just might be observed by a trans or non-binary person, but also in the conversation that you have with a pregnant or trans or non-binary person. If we're so used to using this feminine language, it takes quite a deliberate effort on the part of the healthcare professional to change and modify that language to match the individual in front of them. It can absolutely be done, but it takes somebody to make that deliberate effort and that commitment and put in the practice to do it. And unfortunately, that just doesn't always happen. Or sometimes it's hampered by the sort of systems that we've got in place. So, for example, the paperwork that we have, not in Brighton, I think we're pretty good now. We've updated a lot of it, but in many places it will still say things like woman's details and then partner's details. That paperwork can't easily be changed, but it needs to be. Other challenges which people might face are just lack of staff knowledge. We talked before about healthcare providers not having had much training in this issue, and that also applies to midwives. It's not on the national curriculum for midwives to learn about trans and non-binary people having babies. Our lady, yeah, really good point. Yeah, we talk a lot about my ladies, don't we? Referring to my caseload, my clinic, or that lady in room 10. Yeah, women, ladies, mums as well. It's used a lot. And for most people, that language isn't a problem at all. It's just opening it up so that don't feel excluded, because it has a huge impact on them when it does. So just coming back around to staff lacking knowledge, yeah, this is a huge problem and something that needs to change. What we've done in Brighton is we have delivered training to all of our midwives, our neonatal team, even some of our consultant obstetricians, our neonatal nurses, nursery nurses, MCAs. We are capturing as many of those people in perinatal care as possible to try and fill in that gap which won't have been covered in their training. And not only is knowledge important to provide safe care, so clinically safe care, it's also important for staff confidence as well. I think that's one of the biggest contributors to people making mistakes and having awkward interactions. It's just not feeling like they know what they can say, not feeling like they know what they can't say, and just feeling incredibly awkward as a result. And that carries over. You can pick up on that if you're having a conversation with someone that just has no idea what to say. It's uncomfortable for everybody. So we wanted help to help staff to feel more confident talking to people and having those conversations, as well as being clinically safe as well. Finally, sadly, one of the additional challenges that people might face when trying to access maternity services is just outright transphobia. Midwives or other healthcare professionals refusing to care for them because they're trans. It happens. It happens a lot more than we might want to acknowledge. Sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's more subtle and just results in a substandard of care or omission of care rather than overt aggression and nastiness, but it's equally important and valid. So part of our education is also talking about what rights trans people have and the fact that their rights are enshrined in law, and also staff have an onus to provide this safe and competent care regardless of someone's gender identity or the colour of their skin or their religion or their marital status or any of the other protected characteristics in the Equality Act. So it really is enshrined both in law and in our professional documentation as well, that we should be providing this care. Someone's just popped up on a little question about, has the training gone beyond maternity services? For us, for me and Helen, that's completely beyond our scope. We are both doing all of this work in odd spare hours where we can find them alongside our roles. So right now that's not achievable, but I would hope that individual trusts are taking that on through most of them have an ED&I, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Department. You would hope that they would take that on board for the whole of the trust, because it's not just maternity services that trans people access, it's any form of healthcare. Someone is also saying it's not always part of university training at university level. I can guarantee that it's never part of university training at university level. I wish it was just not always. That would be great, because it means that some people are having some training, but no, I don't think it's part of any. If I'm wrong, and some people have heard of student midwives getting training on this, excellent, brilliant, fill me in. That would be fantastic and good news. I can see that. But as far as I'm aware, the only students who've had any sort of training has been a talk from me in 2018 for the Eastbourne students. Okay, so we talked a little bit about general social and health challenges for trans people, and also additional challenges that might crop up as a result of people pursuing pregnancy and birth. So what has been our response at BSUH to this? What have we set up? We considered various different responses. We considered doing a completely case-loading model where one of us, me or Helen, as gender inclusion midwives, provided the full spectrum of midwifery care, antenatally, interpartum and postnatally. We did consider that, but we actually decided not to go with it for a number of different reasons. We thought that would end up othering trans and non-binary, saying, oh, you can only be looked after by a member of the community. It would also centralise the skill set, so it would prevent all the other midwives from developing the knowledge and the skills and the ability to look after trans and non-binary people. And we just didn't really think that fitted the bill, and we hoped that just wouldn't be needed long term, that we could train up all of the midwives to be able to provide the care that was needed. And it's just not feasible as well. You know, when someone is going to need to come into maternity assessment unit on an emergency basis, the staff there, the core key staff, need to be competent and capable just as much as the community midwives provide care. I'm going to come back to that because someone's given me some really good news about the Queer Birth Club. Excellent. Wonderful. So the model that we ended up going to was to create a gender inclusion team. So a handful of professionals who have some knowledge and some experience in caring for trans and non-binary people, who feel competent and feel able to input on their care as and when needed. This is over and above just the standard community midwifery care. So people go to their community midwife, do their booking in. All community midwives should be asking everybody about their gender identity and their pronouns, so that we don't miss people who maybe haven't changed their name on their NHS records, or who use they them pronouns but don't necessarily volunteer that information. We should be asking everybody. If the community midwife has that conversation and finds out that someone is trans or non-binary, they can do a referral to me or Helen. And as gender inclusion midwives, we offer one-to-one support through the duration of the pregnancy and the postnatal period that is non-clinical. So it's over and above what the community midwife does on appointments. And it's completely free and flexible depending on what the individual feels like they need. So it might be emotional support, it might be signposting to useful resources, it might be offering to put pronoun stickers on the physical paper notes that we're still using. as a way to share your pronouns with everybody that you might meet. So when you go for your 12-week scan, you don't have to say to the sonographer, by the way, please make sure you call me he, him, and you don't call me mum. It's there on a sticker. Those stickers have gone down really well with the few families that we've offered them to, but we're not going to assume that they're necessarily going to be an option for everybody. Not everyone might feel comfortable on their notes. There might be people who perhaps are non-binary and feel comfortable enough with their community midwives to tell them that, but don't necessarily need all the HCAs, the sonographers, checking their blood pressure to know what their gender identity is. So we leave that as an open offer. We also provide advocacy at people's obstetric appointments and scans. So we offer to go along with them to be an extra source of support. Or if they don't feel like they need our physical presence, we just do a phone call ahead of time and say, just to let you know, there's a John on your list today. It's not a mistake. He is John. He's a he, him. And yeah, please just be respectful of his gender identity. We also offer personalised antenatal education. So we recognise that it's quite a big ask for community midwives delivering antenatal classes to use inclusive language every single time and to use purely anatomical terms. And we recognise that this might be quite triggering for people to attend a group class that's maybe using language that they're not comfortable with. So instead, Helen or I will see people at home and do an antenatal class with them one-on-one with them and their partner. And it gives us a chance to explore more individual issues for them that might need to go into part of their, and it allows us to cover their preferences for infant feeding as well. Some people might want to chest feed, which is an alternative term for breastfeeding, even after having had top surgery, but that might require a little bit of extra support and input from us. So we're able to have those sort of conversations with people and put plans in place. Quick little question that had just popped up is about pronouns. Do all community midwives ask pronouns at BSUH? I hope so. I'm not a fly on the wall in all of the booking appointments, but they are taught to in the training. They are encouraged to. They are given the opportunity to practice asking their pronouns and explain what a pronoun is, because it can feel a bit awkward the first time you ask. I hope that happens in practice. Don't know, but fingers crossed. As we move over to electronic services as well, we're hoping it's going to be on one of those tick boxes there. So where you generally have sort of what is your official name on the NHS record, an opportunity to have your preferred name if you go by anything else. And I think slotting in under there is the perfect place to put what pronouns do you use. And that way we ensure it gets asked every single time and not just by the midwives that feel okay to ask or remember to ask amongst the million other questions they've got to ask at the booking. So what else have we done at BSUH, as well as set up this model of care with extra input from gender inclusion midwives and consultant obstetrician? We've also created 2 different policies, which are in the ratification process right now. Everything got slowed down due to COVID, like the rest of the world, but we're hoping to get those ratified really soon. The first one is a kind of like a position statement setting out the BSUH position on care for trans and non-binary people and just qualifying their rights. And it's a language guide as well. So it provides support for people writing leaflets and website content about how to make sure that your language is inclusive and gives a rationale for the approach that we've gone for. And this has been Helen's baby. Helen has led on this language guide. The decision that we've come to is, you might think, a little bit unusual. We actually talk about pregnant women and people. So rather than just pregnant people or birthing parents, we've chosen to go for pregnant women and people, birthing women and people, new mothers and parents, an additive form of language that is inclusive, so that we make sure that we're not erasing women in the process. And I think it strikes a really nice balance of including everybody, naming the people that we're referring to, but without excluding anybody. One of the problems with just referring to women instead of pregnant women or birthing women is that it excludes the women who can't have babies, people who experience infertility, trans women. So I think it's always worth adding that qualifier in there of pregnant women and people, or new mothers and people, just to narrow down what is the demographic that we're talking about. So the language guide goes into that in a lot more detail and eloquence than I can muster, but Helen has done a wonderful job on that. You read it when it comes out. We've also produced a clinical protocol which lays out in a lot more detail the model of care that we've got for our gender inclusion midwives and team, sets out the responsibility of midwives, such as asking about pronouns at booking, and sets out a whole care pathway for what extra support people might have. On top of policy, we've conducted some of our own local research at Trans Pride, both in 2018 and 2019. We did a questionnaire of what sort of barriers to accessing services people were feeling and experiencing, and what sort of suggested changes to services they feel would make them more likely to access us. So it's all about accessibility and working with the problem of the free birthing, so that people didn't feel like that was their only option to come to us and we were safe. And at the moment, Helen and I are also sitting on the steering committee for some research for NHS England, which I'm really excited about. It's being carried out by the LGBT Foundation, funded by NHS England, with loads of expert input on the steering committee. So not only have you got Helen and me, but you've also got birthing parents who are trans and non-binary, who've experienced it themselves, both in the NHS and outside of the NHS with private midwife. We've also got sociologists on there, loads of researchers. It's a fantastic piece of work. I'd really appreciate if everybody could push that within their local communities, people filling it out as possible. And I really look forward to looking at the results of that and seeing what further changes we can make, because this is all new. In some senses, it's experimental. We're figuring it out as we go along with making these service changes. As I'd mentioned already, we've also done a fair bit of education, and gender inclusion session was on mandatory training for midwives in 2019. So all our midwives at that point got that training, as well as allied health professionals, including maternity support workers and neonatal nurses, nursery nurses. We've also been working on raising awareness, not only at Trans Pride, as I mentioned, but also through these sort of webinars, which Suzanne and Hannah have been excellent at promoting and encouraging. So thank you guys. We've also done sessions with the perinatal mental health team, both locally and another webinar across the south, raising this as an issue. And I think that's particularly important for perinatal mental health team, because something that we've seen and has been in the literature as well is an unexpected amount of referrals to perinatal mental health for trans people that wouldn't necessarily be done for cis people. So I think there's some confusion about the role of the perinatal mental health team. Are they just there as a support service, or are they there for people who actually have serious mental health conditions, of which gender dysphoria and being trans is not one? It's not a serious psychiatric disorder in that sense. We've been working with them about better triaging the referrals that come in and making sure that we don't over-medicalise people just because they're trans, and assume that they're going to experience lots of psychiatric difficulties just because of that. And finally, all this work that we've done has been really well recognised, which is incredible. Presenting at the Leeds conference in January was fantastic. That was international, with people from America, Canada, Sweden, Finland, Australia, Germany, the Netherlands. It was absolutely fantastic, and I learned so much going there and presenting there as well. As Suzanne has mentioned as well, we got the Silver Award from Jackie Dunkley-Bent in 2019, which is incredible. And a bit more local stuff as well. We've presented at various LGBTQ conferences for BSUH. So we are getting the word out there, and I think awareness is gradually increasing, which is great. And opportunities like this are just golden. So thank you again, Suzanne and Hannah, for making it happen, and Karen as well. So having dipped your toe in the water and learned a little bit from me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. What more can you guys do now? What can you take forward from having just had a sort of an hour presentation? If you don't do anything else, I just want you to have a little seed in the back of your mind that not all pregnant people are women. Okay. Radical. That's huge. It's one little sentence, but it is massive. The implications of it are huge. So just remember, when you talk to a pregnant person, when you write a leaflet for pregnant people to read, when you do a video for pregnant people to watch about an update on service changes, not everybody watching and listening to that is going to identify as a woman. And as such, it's a good idea to always use inclusive language. So don't just reserve your inclusive language for when you're talking to someone who you know is trans, because you're not necessarily going to know. We should be using it at all times because it communicates that we are accessible, that we are safe, that we are knowledgeable, and that people can come to us if they are trans and non-binary. And what we recommend using is, as mentioned, Helen's model of additive inclusive language. So naming the people that you're talking about and making sure it includes everybody. So pregnant women and people, breastfeeding and chest feeding, new mothers and parents, rather than just women, breastfeeding and mums. Yeah. And practice doing it. It makes it easier with practice. It really does. Other recommendations I can make is get used to talking about pronouns and volunteering yours. It was lovely to see at the beginning on the little chat box, some people introducing themselves and putting their pronouns in brackets. Absolutely fantastic, brilliant. Feels a little bit awkward the first time you do it. I completely understand that. But as a cis person, it is one of the biggest acts of that you can do. It takes a second, but it makes a huge difference. If you're talking to a trans or non-binary person and you volunteer your pronouns off the bat, it immediately is going to make them feel more confident and more safe and able to say kind of, oh, cool, right, I'm Ash, my pronouns are he, him. Yeah, it's just enormous. It's quite hard to express how much that means, but if you can do that in regular day-to-day interactions, stick it on your email signature, it's going to make a massive difference. And the other thing with pronouns as well is practice using ones that you're not familiar with. So practice saying he gave birth, or his new baby, or he's chest feeding, or they want to center birth. We're not used to using those generally. So it might take a little bit of practice before it becomes natural. And it's always good to do that practice before you need to use it. So before you have your first interaction with a trans guy or non-binary pregnant person, get familiar with the language so that you're not feeling nervous about it in that first conversation and you're not stumbling over it or getting really worried about it. Maybe team up with each other people who've listened to this presentation. You might want to get a little coffee date on Zoom and just have a little practice of your language and help each other out with that. Second pages of recommendations is these are kind of the next level up. So those first three things were relatively easy, do them by yourself. Next level up is think about the service that you provide. Does the language that you use and the image that you use really represent the demographic that might be coming to you? And I'll take this opportunity to just remind you about intersectionality, that we're not just talking about gender expression, but thinking about all the other protected characteristics as well. Have you only got skinny white people on your website, or have you also got people of different body shapes and sizes, people with different skin colours, people with mixture of abilities? Have you got pictures of anyone who's a wheelchair user, for example? Have you got pictures of anybody who's wearing a hijab or in a different family setup? So have a think about it. It's a challenge. I absolutely know that. From stock photos really don't give you very much choice, do they? You do have to go out of your way to look for these images, but it makes a huge difference, not only in making people feel safe, but communicating that your service is kind of knowledgeable and cares about looking after these intersectionalities. And that then leads on to consciously trying to include trans and non-binary people in your service. So it's brilliant to use inclusive language, and that is going to help people to feel able to access maternity services. But if you can actually get them on board on your MVP, even better. If you can get some trans and non-binary people inputting and feeding directly back to you about their experience, wonderful. If you can be led by them in feeding back to the trust what changes they need to make, even better. Yeah. So I don't know what the terminology you use is for getting people into your MVP recruitment. I don't know, but actively try and recruit or encourage them to get involved with you. I think that's gonna really help. And if you do find that you're talking to someone about their experience, try not to go in with any preconceptions, because there's a whole spectrum of different ways of experiencing pregnancy as a non-binary person. Don't input your preconceptions on it, but be led by that individual narrative is for them. They might have absolutely loved it. They might have felt like being a trans guy who's pregnant is an absolute superpower. And cis guys can't do this. I'm really chuffed I've got a uterus and I can have a baby. That's really awesome and cool. They might have had a lovely and empowering experience of it, or they might have found it really, really tough. It might have hit them much harder than they thought it would. It might have been 9 months that they just had to grind through because they ultimately wanted the result at the end. They wanted the baby, but they didn't want the pregnancy and birth experience. And you can't tell what someone's experience is going to have been. So ask open questions. How has this pregnancy been for you? How did you find giving birth? What was it like interacting with the midwives? Rather than kind of assuming, oh, that must have been hard for you, when actually it might not have been, or it might have been. Who knows? So just be led by them, I would say. And finally, develop your knowledge as well. I know I've talked a lot today, but it really is only the tip of the iceberg. Some people have come up with some really useful and productive stuff in the comments. Someone's linked to Queer Birth Club, which is an excellent resource, and I really should have had that at the end of my presentation, but I will add it onto future ones. So other resources that you might want to check out. On a more casual note, there's 2 really good films which you could maybe set up a watch of. The more recent one is Seahorse by Freddie McConnell, who's a Guardian journalist. That follows his journey through pregnancy and giving birth, and includes a wonderful birth scene at the end, which is a proper tearjerker. But I found that this film, because he worked so closely with the directors, there's one moment in it that just so encapsulates gender dysphoria and that feeling. It's worth watching just for that 10-second moment of him at a dinner table. So look out for the dinner table scene if you do watch it. It's an excellent one. And there's also A Deal with the Universe, which was a documentary filmed by Jason Barker, following his journey through fertility and pregnancy. And that was a little bit older, that one. But both of them show different perspectives. Trans and non-binary people birthing their babies. You can learn a lot just from watching these films. But if you want to do a little bit more in-depth research and learning from some more formal sources, there's lots of stuff. There's the Queer Birth Club, as you've seen up there, that Nicola Burnett has very kindly shared. There's also Birth for Everybody, which is a wonderful website. It's mostly American-based. There's also the Trans Pregnancy Research Study, which is from the Leeds conference. Their website, they are producing various bits of research out through there, and they've got links to other resources. Gyres do an online module, and Gendered Intelligence run a training course as well. As to are paid for options, so it depends what things you have. And finally, get in touch with me and Helen. Our email address is up there again, bsuh.genderinclusionmidwives@nhs.net. Once we've got our 2 protocols ratified, hoping COVID lets us do that, we will be putting them on our trust website for open access for literally anybody to come to, because we've put a huge amount of work into these. We don't want it to only benefit the local population. It's really important to us that the work we've done doesn't have to be repeated by other trusts all over the country separately. We don't need academic ownership of it. We want other people to be learning and benefiting from it as well. So if you do send us a quick email, and we will add you to our list to send out a bundle of resources once everything is finished and all ready to go. 2 excellent other resources just mentioned up here, one of which is a book by Trevor McDonald called Where's the Mother? Really, really good book. It's about his experience of chest feeding his baby as a Canadian guy, trans dad, going along to La Leche League during his pregnancy. On his first attendance at La Leche League, they had no idea about trans people, or that a trans guy could get pregnant, or if he did get pregnant, would want to chest feed his baby. But they went on a huge learning journey with him. He's now a lactation consultant, which is pretty awesome. And his website is a great one. It's called Milk Junkies. Be careful when you search for that. It brings up all sorts of stuff. Make sure you click on the search for Trevor McDonald Milk Junkies, and it will be a little bit safer on the search. What else? Nicola Burnett has also highlighted Freddie's current work, as well as making that film Seahorse. He's also documenting his current journey to conceive a second baby on Instagram, which is very brave of him. Good for him. Okay, that's it from me. Does anybody have any other questions? I know I've done a couple of little ones as we went along, but I'm ask me anything you want to. What we got here? You can do the little hands up, I'm sure, or you can type in the box, whatever feels better for you. Hey, Suzanne. Oh, you got your microphone off, Suzanne. Yeah, she is.
Technophone. Thank you. Thanks very much. Brilliant presentation. Thank you. And it'd be great for everyone to be able to see it recorded. I have got one question. With the paperwork that BCH have updated to be inclusive of everyone, would you be able to share who can give information to other trusts for that? Because we have been asked that in the past. Or was it through you?
This paperwork had actually been already updated before we came on the scene, and is pretty good. Anyway, I think it's the way the cookie crumbled. I'm not sure if it was a deliberate decision. There are a few references still just to women in there, but they're few and far between. I think their main focus had been on not just having husband and father everywhere, but they inadvertently ended up making it a bit more inclusive. I think the best reference is going to be Helen's language guide once that comes out. It's a thing to share.
Thanks, Ash. I think that was via the. I will take credit. The MVP did raise that as Jess, who was co-chair at the time.
Well, you guys.
It was Jess. I'll give Jess credit, who was co-chair at the time. But if there is anyone if you know of anyone in the trust who did get involved in that, because we have been asked specifically for that paperwork update, can you just email me and let me know who it is? And I'll have their email address and I can get in touch with them, and then I can share it across the network. Thank you.
Another good tip from Terry, Biff and I on Instagram, and also on YouTube. They're an American couple, aren't they? I think, who did a lot of documentation about one of their pregnancies, and they just write a lot about their approach to parenting as well as trans and queer family. So yeah, Biff and I is a great suggestion from Terry. So thank you for that. Caden X Official, I've not seen that one. But I know there was a trans guy called Caden who was in the media a couple of years ago. I wonder if that's him. Terry may or may not be able to confirm that. But yeah, more and more stuff on social media for you to follow, and just learn in a very casual way. You can just sort of absorb it when you're scrolling through your phone, looking at other stuff. Yeah, great recommendations. Somerset MVP. Was it Donna?
It is. It's Donna. You talked about inclusion in pictures and leaflets and things like that. So do you have any images?
I wish I did for wider distribution. Just a friend through the network has very kindly shared with me his birth photos, and he's been happy for me to use them. They don't actually appear in this presentation. The two that I've got in this presentation were just found on Google. So the first one is from Biff and I, actually, the family. Trevor McDonald, Susan has linked up here to his work. He's got some photos up on Google as well. I know you get into a bit of a shady situation, isn't it, using Googled images on printed media? Yeah, it's a real challenge.
Yeah, I mean, when I've looked at doing things in the past and I've gone sort of searching, and I've even tried to contact a few people, but I don't get any reply because understandably, I think you need a relationship with somebody before they're going to let you use the images. And yeah, Google, I think we aren't really supposed to to use. I mean, the odd thing when you're doing a presentation is not so bad, but to do an official leaflet, I think we might. Yeah. Okay, thank you though.
Wish I had the answer.
Yeah, well, if you've not got stock images, then there's
yeah, and Catherine Williams has just kindly linked to AIM's articles. Yeah, there's 2 chest feeding, and I think they I'm not quite sure what the other one is, but there's certainly one on chest feeding. Unfortunately, they don't have any pictures on theirs either. One way around it is if you've got anyone artistic in your team, draw them. It doesn't necessarily have to be photos of real life people, does it? A lot of things like logos are created using graphic design. When it comes to that, the sky's the limit. There we go. Links to the 2 AIMS articles. Wonderful stuff. Great. Susan, you still got your hand up, Suzanne. And your mic off. Accidental hand left up.
Sorry.
No.
I should have learnt by now.
What other questions have we got, if any? Or other suggestions of resources? Because there is increasing amounts out there. Share them all in the chat comments. Let's open it up as much as possible. Interestingly, the link that has been shared for Trevor McDonald, he's also done some work on induced lactation, which is hinted at in our protocol. And what we're talking about is induced lactation for non-gestational parents. So this might be a lesbian couple who are both cis women. The mum who hasn't been pregnant, it is possible for her to induce lactation. And there's various clinical protocols that you can follow for that using hormones. But interestingly, trans women can also induce lactation if they've been taking estrogens for long enough to develop breast tissue. That's a possibility as well. And Trevor McDonald has written about that, as well as Jack Newman is one of the ones who did the protocol. So that's just another interesting aspect to think about. Anything else from anybody? How do you think that your trusts are going to respond if you come to them raising this as an issue, raising accessibility? What do you think that the sort of responses you might get or the challenges you might face about making these language and inclusivity changes? I'd be interested to hear how the rest of the country gets on.
I haven't put my hand up, but I'll just come in. We've already started to do some work to look at when they're producing information. I think sometimes there's an overuse of any kind of gender anyway, where you can just say if you've got a leaflet that's going out to a patient, a service user or anything really to that person, then why not just refer to that? You are recommended to take blah 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 or whatever. So we've done that. I think we're trying to use women and birthing people, or maybe we need to look at a bit more than that. Sometimes I think the responses are a little bit like, don't get it, don't understand it, and things like that. And I think it's good that you specifically say not to remove that woman from there. And when I try and talk to people, I do say, but if you're reading something, you're probably not going to even notice if it's a slight change on using an extra word, or if it doesn't say woman, you probably wouldn't notice. But if you don't identify as a woman, you are going to notice. So even if it's a very small amount of people, it's not going to be a huge effect on you if we take that out or add in an extra word. It's not going to make difference to you, but it does to one person, then that's amazing. So we have actually had a trans man come through the service here who kindly shared his story, and I think that really helped. So yeah, I think it's very good to do it. And like you say, even that changing from a dad, a husband to partner has taken so long, and we've got, if we don't start now, I still fear that it's going to take a long time to get anywhere with things like this as well, or any kind of diversity. It takes such a long time to make that normal.
Absolutely. So, it's a real journey, isn't it? And like I say, the seeds of this journey were sowed 4 or 5 years ago when Helen was still a student. It's not going to be immediate overnight. These things take practice, and they take real kind of grit and determination to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. That's great that you've had some personal experience at your trust with a trans guy coming through your services, and really good that you asked for feedback. Something which I would just like to bring up is that it's a difficult balance to strike. We should absolutely always ask for feedback and absolutely always ask for input. But we also need to make sure that we're not putting huge amounts of emotional labour onto vulnerable people. A lot of trans people, because we're few and far between, we end up being the leaders in change in whatever field we're in, whether that's at our work or in a hobby. We are often called on to do presentations for free, and it's a hugely emotionally taxing undertaking. And I think it's just worth remembering, whenever you ask a trans person feedback or input or reviewing something, that your request is going to be one amongst many. And this is in no means any way at all attack on you, Donna. Please don't take it that way. It's just reminded me in my head to say to everybody else, just have that awareness in mind when you ask people for their feedback, that they might not even be interested in changing the service. They may want to just kind of forget about their experience and get on with their life, and they might not have that kind of activist drive and zeal, or even feel like that's their responsibility. And someone else has very kindly said, Nicola Burnett, pay people for their work and expertise. Absolutely, 100%. Yes. As English people, we're really crap at asking for pay, aren't we? I know I certainly am. And when it's something that I'm passionate about and feel is really important, you kind of feel I'm just going to do it anyway, even if nobody's paying me, because it needs to get done. And I think that's quite a common experience. And Susan Bewley, thank you very much. That's excellent addition. All of this stuff is in our protocol, but as just highlighted for us from the NICE guidance, ask the patient how they wish to be addressed and ensure that their choice is respected and used. It's there already, isn't it? People might not necessarily have considered that this means gender, but it's in there. It's stuff that we should be doing already. It's skills that we're just applying them to a new perspective. I'm just figuring out how to speak to the other people that have got their hands up. So I'm going to try stop presenting and seeing if I can get up the grid view. Apologies if I disappear, or if we can just go back to seeing everybody's faces. There we go. Can you still see me? Awesome. Who shall we come to? I can't see names, but OM, you've got your hand up.
Hi there, it's Louise from the Oxfordshire Maternity Voices Partnership.
Hey, Louise.
I was just putting my hand up in response to something you said about what we thought our trust might do or how they might respond. When following the networking day that we had, when I first heard about the work that was happening in Brighton, I spoke with my director of midwifery directly about it. And she was very keen that if there's a trust that is paving the way and doing good work, and there are things that we can learn from it and replicate, that we should absolutely be doing that. And so I think in reality, it's one of those things where it needs somebody, i.e. me, keeping the pressure on and reminding them it's happening, and keep saying, what are we doing? What can we do? Look what they're doing. But also I think in reality, the pressures that some of the staff are under to just continue the work that they're doing at the moment, particularly at the moment, is huge. And so I think anything where we're able to take your resources and say, look, this is how it's been done, let's replicate it, is fantastic. And I think also, you know, I guess I was just quite optimistic about the response I got, really, which was, yeah, we should absolutely be making that happen, particularly if somewhere else is making it happen and we can follow their example. And we've had Heidi, one of our consultant midwives, has been here today, because I shared the information about that this was happening today with the consultant midwives and the director of midwifery and various other people, to try and make sure that people had access to hear what you've been doing. And Heidi's come, and I know that she's really passionate about being inclusive to all people and making the service work. So I feel optimistic about it, with that underpinning of knowing that it's time and resources, and I shall keep trying to find out what you're doing and how I can just give them the resources to be like, look, just this is what you can do. And then I think, you know, hopefully change will happen. But I think it will be change from, for instance, so if booking in forms can change so that the language is there and the parts are there to make sure people ask the right questions, then it will happen that way. I think the harder thing to do is to directly ask midwives and keep reminding them to change their language. I think for some midwives it's very ingrained, and healthcare professionals and people. I just mean people, really. It's ingrained, and I think it will be a hard thing for many to change and to think to change unless it's prompted. It's there in a prompt. Yeah. Which is why I think the resources and the forms and the literature is very important, because if that's what people are using as their prompt, then it will be there in the forefront of their mind.
I think until trusts have their first experience of caring for a trans or non-binary person, it can all feel a little bit kind of vague and theoretical, and oh, you only get trans people in Brighton, we're not going to have any of that here, why do we need to bother? Actually, no, trans and non-binary people are all over the country. They're going to be accessing maternity services all over the country. And if you can get ready before you have your first service user that's out, even better. That's going to be great.
Yeah, and I also I know that from my director of midwifery told me that she'd worked in Essex when there'd been quite a lot of surrogacy happening, and when and so she had experience of looking at how the service worked and supported for surrogacy. So I think
that
she'd also been
changes as well, doesn't it?
So I think because she'd already been through a process and seeing how beneficial it is and to be prepared, that certainly helped in her receptiveness to looking at change. Yeah. Right. So I'm optimistic, that's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, good. I like an optimist. Right, I think who have we got next? I think Nicola Burnett was next, and then we'll come to the next person after that.
Yeah, I just wanted to, excuse my cat in my face. I just wanted to respond to what you were saying about language being really ingrained and really difficult to change, Louise. And I think one thing that's really important is that people learn by what they see and what they hear and modelling. So I think, like, if everybody on this call goes back now and really makes that conscious effort to every time you're presenting, every time you're talking to anybody, every time you write a social media post, to make your language really inclusive, the more it becomes normality and the easier it becomes for people to change. Because it does feel strange sometimes. But if you start, you know, every time you're having that conversation, you are using that inclusive language, it does start to trickle down. And we've definitely had issues with some midwives, you know, that have been practicing for 30 years or 40 years. But even those now, they will sometimes say, oh, my ladies, or the girls, but they now correct themselves almost automatically. If I'm in that meeting, they'll go, sorry, Nikki. Oh, and they'll change their language. So learning, they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they've come a huge distance to where they were even just 12 months ago. So it sometimes feels like you're banging your head against a brick wall and you're not getting anywhere, but eventually it does start to drip down and those changes do start to happen.
Right. I've just got a nice photo, but I don't have the initials of the next person who had their hands up. You're blonde with short hair and you've got a V-neck black top on your photo, whoever that is.
Hi, it sounds like it might be. Hi.
Hi, I can see you now.
Yeah. I just really wanted to sort of, reiterate what Louise and both Nicola were saying. And I think Louise kindly gave us the invite to today's session, which has been wonderful, and I think I'm a midwife, but currently working as part of the ODN network, neonatal network, which is Thames Valley and Wessex. And I was just thinking yesterday, we had a long discussion about our website, and already I'm thinking, have we considered this, and maybe we need to go back and re-look at everything. I am one of those midwives that has been practicing for a very long time. And I think from my point of view, it's about keeping midwives safe as well. And sometimes they'll stumble because they don't know what the right words are to say. So it's about exactly what you've done. I think raising it as a mandatory training would be brilliant. And I guess the other thought that sort of comes to me is there will have been people, we would have cared for people who are trans people, and they've somehow got through our system, and hopefully it was a reasonable experience, but they haven't come forward. And I think that's, to me, that's a bit sad. And so the more that we can,
isn't it?
that they, because it won't be just Brighton, it will be everywhere. So I just wanted to thank you also for today's session. It's been wonderful, Ash, and very illuminating. Thank you.
Thank you said that, because I think someone is doing some research at the moment to provide some evidence of people accessing maternity services, changing their presentation and their interactions in order to be invisible for their own safety reasons.
I'm sure.
So maybe not saying actually there's a different name that I go by than what's on my maternity records, or shaving off their facial hair, or changing their clothing and their hairstyle, it just in order to feel safe accessing those services. And people shouldn't have to do that.
No. But also the other thing is, for me, partners as well. I have had experience of caring for a woman whose partner was trans woman, and obviously prior to having sort of any medical transition. And so it was considering them. So they were there. Do you see what I? And that was a number of years ago. But So I think we need to consider the partners as very much as
and in some of our paperwork, I know I've not got into a huge amount of detail about changes that we made, but one of the bits of paperwork we've made as an extra insert next to the birth plan is a sheet with different anatomical terms. So some people won't be comfortable calling their clitoris, and they actually refer to it as their dick or their T-dick sometimes. Some people will refer to their vagina as their front hole instead. And that's a way of dealing with dysphoria by creating different terms for the same anatomy. So we created a sheet to go in next to the birth plan. It's called My Language Preferences, and it just invites people to tell us about how they talk about their body, so that we can use it as a reference sheet and reflect that language back to them. And one of the things on the sheet is a little quote from Susan Bewley about talk to people about how they refer to themselves and reflect that language, a bit of justification in there from NICE, but also a bit at the top about parenting terms for both the birthing parent and for their partner, and space for another birth partner in case it's a polyamorous family as well. So some people we won't use mum or dad. Some people will use baba, for example, as a non-gendered parenting term, or ren sometimes. The world is your limit when it comes to parenting terms, and it's important that we consider the partners exactly as you said, as well as the birthing parents.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ash.
Who else have we got? Somerset MVP. I think you've had your hand up for a little while. If you've had your hand up,
me again. I was going to
pop it down.
I've got another question, because it was talking about paperwork and changing paperwork, and obviously many of our systems now are going into the digital platform with.
Can you imagine that?
I just wonder how, or if this is being considered, and how those digital platforms, how
Well, it's the perfect time to consider it, isn't it? If you're changing your paperwork and your documentation anyway, why not make it inclusive all in one go? Because I think Badgernet does allow flexibility in terms of what questions you ask in extra tick boxes.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because I hear so many times, you know, oh, the system won't let us add this, or the system only has these options. And obviously Badgernet's one of the ones that people talk about being reasonably good, not perfect for what we need to be doing and going forward, but that would be good if it does have that. I don't know if anybody's got any experience or with any digital systems that have that flexibility, or where it's been considered at the moment.
Donna, my experience with digital systems, we're not on Badgernet, we use Euroking here, is if you're willing to pay for it, you can change it.
Yeah.
But it does, the changes cost a lot of money. But if it's something that's prioritised and you'll pay the price, then you can have it changed. Obviously not everyone's willing to pay, but unfortunately that is what it seems to come down to.
No, well, I think our trusts are changing very soon, so it's something to be mindful of in all areas, really, not just this topic, but everything really, is when they look at changing how they negotiate that. No, that's interesting. It's just a thought, isn't it? Especially with nationally, I don't know, Suze, you know, where they're working on these digital work streams as well, that they're taking consideration of these things in their boxes. If we were not even getting ethnicity you know, nationally properly. So
it's the embrace. That's just absolutely shocking, isn't it? We need to know people's ethnicities and track those to the morbidity and mortality outcomes. That's really worrying. If anybody's had their hands up and has already asked the question, can you pop it down so I can see who is new and still would like to ask? Cool. Right. Kate, you're up next. Hi, Kate.
Hi, I was just wondering what words do you actually then use on your booking form? Because I know it's pretty poor reasoning, but pregnant woman, birthing person takes up a lot more space than just woman on a or patient or whatever comes on the forms. How do you manage to get around that without it sort of, you know, taking up half the paper?
Really simple: name, address, telephone number. And then the bottom half of the page is partner's name, telephone number, date of birth.
Okay.
So you don't actually need to say woman. There's literally no need, because it's their paperwork. If it says name and address, it's going to be, who else's address is it going to be other than theirs?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense.
Because I think we just throw women in there all the time and we don't necessarily need it to be there. For the times then it does need to be there, then yes, you do need to look at the language, but other times we just say it without any necessity at all.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Don't know if that helps. Anybody else? Yeah, someone's got some, Susan Bewley's got some really nice suggestions on how to have those conversations. So when you do the booking with people, you will ask them, you'll check that you've got your name correct from sort of the NHS record, and then asking open questions. Do you go by any other name? How do you like to be referred to? How do you like to be addressed is another way. And I say to them, when I introduce myself, my name's Ash, my pronouns are he, him. What pronouns do you use? Sometimes I'm met with a completely blank face, and that's fine. I'll just say pronouns are the terms we use when we're not using someone's name. So if you were not using my name, you call me he. What do we use for you? The reason why we ask is because not everybody who gives birth uses she, her pronouns, and we want to make sure that we are respectful when we talk to everybody. And most people, even if they didn't know what a pronoun was before, they didn't know the word for it, go, oh, that's really cool, actually. Yeah, thanks for asking. I'm she, but yeah, cool. That's great that you're doing it. And it just opens their minds up, even if they don't benefit from our gender inclusion services because they're a cis person. The next time they meet a trans person who says what their pronouns are, they'll go, actually, I know why they're doing this. This makes sense. And it all just spreads out from there, doesn't it? Little question from Susan on here. Are you advising obstetricians to toggle between preferred language and formal anatomical language when writing up operations, or to use the new terms? Really excellent question there. We are asking people to use preferred language in conversation. So if you're talking to somebody and asking for clinical symptoms, if it's safe to do so and you are still getting the information that you need, try and use their preferred language. But if you're writing up an operation notes, which it is really important that they are clinically accurate, so that any other health professional working off the basis of those, yeah, sometimes you are just going to have to use anatomical language. We can't get away from that 100%. I think the most important bit is in conversation with somebody, reflecting their language back to them as much as possible. Hopefully that answers your question, Susan. It looks like it does. Yeah. Karen.
I'm sorry, I was about to say thanks, Ashley.
It was just a really quick one, actually, just in terms of, as somebody who doesn't use their full given name, actually, for me, when on all of my notes and everything, everybody always called me my full given name. And actually, just when you are asked, what name do you go by, it can make you feel so much more comfortable. I didn't feel like I was in trouble the whole time. Absolutely. And so it's something so little as that is actually incredibly inclusive for everybody in terms of what they go by and what their name is. Not everybody goes by their full name, and it was just so much friendlier and so much more relaxing and comfortable for me when somebody asked, and that's just somebody who's got the woman and everything going for me in terms of that comfortability too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it benefits everybody to ask that, doesn't it?
Can I say a huge thank you, Ash, for giving us your time today and presenting. We will be sharing the recording across the MVP network, but also Kathy Brewster said she'll put it on the National Maternity Voices YouTube channel, which means that everyone can share it across their trusts. So all your midwives, make sure you do share it on all your networks on the MVP so that we can get the information out there as fast as possible, so that Ash hasn't got to spend too much of your own personal time doing this, presenting, which I know you're passionate about it, but also if we can share this, it's been a fantastic presentation, so thank you so much. If anyone needs emails or anything just message me through the Facebook page, through the invite, it's absolutely fine, you've all got my details. And thank you so much, Ash, for sharing everything and giving your email address as well, because I think you're going to get inundated now with emails, so thank you so much.
Again, for the opportunity, it means a huge amount, and these changes, they don't happen without having the support of allies giving us these platforms for support. So thank you so much. It really does mean a lot.
I think ready to sign off now, so have a lovely weekend, everyone. Thanks again. Any questions, please do get in touch with me as well. Take care, everyone. Bye.